Good evening, everybody. Sammy Thunder here. Welcome back to the channel. So for the card show discussion, this is going to be a redo on the video that I originally had primed and ready to go. Now, this is a video that was supposed to be released a week ago or 2 weeks ago, but I decided that a break was needed, and so I decided to hold off on releasing this video. So a lot of the comments you may see are a bit outdated, but the overall scope of the conversation is very much relevant. So where we left off, I was asking you guys about paying above comps or paying comps for certain cards. How do you guys feel about it? How does it vary into your decision making? Can you justify paying above comps for a card you can frequently find versus paying above comps for a rare card? And a lot of you guys kind of shared that sort of that sort of mindset that if it's a frequently found card, you'll exhibit more patience into it, and you wouldn't pay above comps unless it truly fit the criteria that you're setting yourself for. So I think a lot of you guys kind of shared that mindset. Some of you are just completely would not pay above comps for anything. So that it's interesting to see the different mindsets that some of the collectors have. But I picked out, I think, 4 comments from the video that I released 2 weeks ago. So we're going to go through that tonight. And then ultimately we'll carry into the end of this video, which we will discuss the next topic directly relating to card shows as well. So I'm going to bring up the first comment. We'll kind of talk a little bit about that after. Wax Pack Wisdom, this is my buddy Jake. He writes, great video, Sammy. As always, the answer is it depends. In the scenario you laid out, as a collector, sometimes you have to be willing to pay above comps for a card you want for your PC that you may not see pop up often at small local shows or online. The Shriners in Boston is coming up, and I expect to have access to a lot more pre-war than I normally see locally. I try to be disciplined when it comes to buying, but I suspect I will pay above comps for some of the cards I want at the show, and I am budgeting for that. A lot of times when you're at a show and actually holding the card you want, it can be really hard to turn down the chance to buy it over a few bucks. For cards that can be found more commonly, there's no good reason to pay above comps, and dealers should be willing to work with you if you express interest in such a card. At the end of the day, this is about yours or mine or anyone's PC, and it is hard to begrudge anyone spending whatever they see fit for a card that will stay on their PC for a lifetime. So definitely a lot to unpack there, but the one thing that stood out to me is the fact that when you're at a show and you have a card in hand, it definitely does make it a lot more challenging, especially if you're really serious about the card. A lot of times I see people going around and asking to see cards from a dealer, and it's part of me wants to know, like, is there really a desire to want that card, or are you just curious about it, which is fine. But if I think what Jake is mentioning is that when you pick up a card that you are after, you've done your research on, you know that you want it. It does make it challenging to put it back down, especially if it has the price already marked on it for you, so you know where the dealer wants to be. And if that price is close to what your budget is, then obviously it's going to be difficult to put it back, especially if you feel as though you could definitely make a deal. So there's definitely that. And also another thing that he mentioned is that he does budget for, he does expect to have to pay above comps at times because it depends on the card. So he's smart that he budgets for it. He puts in a little bit extra to compensate for the chances that you might end up paying above comps. And I think this kind of this whole business of comps, it's seen as a resource and a tool. I don't think it should be a sale end all. I was listening to the For Collectors collector to dealer discussion with Theo and Howard, and it's interesting that you can't, just because a card is averaging at $1,000 doesn't make the top card of that range $1,000. the $1,000 average is taking a little bit of the lower of the grade and the higher of the grade and kind of creating an average together. So you have to probably, I guess you have to justify the fact that better condition sevens versus lower condition sevens are going to have a bit more premium to it. But again, I think, what Jake was talking about is that it all depends on the card you want. I talked a little bit about this before. A 56 mantle and a 1, there's so many variations in what that means. So a 1 can range from a lot of creases and wrinkles to a 1 that has maybe a few, or if not none, but might have paper loss on the back or what. So every collector is different. Every collector is going to look at that circumstance a lot differently. So, but nevertheless, I thought Jake brought up some good points. Bring in some extra money to compensate for the possibility of having to pay over comps. And also, it's true about having the card in hand. It does make a big difference. So thank you, Jake. That was some really good points. This is from John, JP Cards. John asks, great question. I think probably yes on both your examples. You mentioned 10% more on the 56 mantle example. At a big regional show, there likely will be a few others at a similar price point, but if the card is quote-unquote speaking to me, and I don't have to deal with tax and shipping, and the dealer conversation is pleasant enough, I think 10% above comps is not unreasonable. So, interestingly, John brings up the concept of tax and shipping and the dealer conversation. Those three things, I think, are perfectly respectable variables, that should go into it as well when you're making a decision. And I know John probably also looks at a criteria for his cards as well. That he's not going to jump on the first 56 mantle that comes into play. He's probably going to kind of go from table to table to kind of, just to kind of see what possibilities are there. But he does bring up points about a lack of tax, a lack of shipping, and if the conversation is pleasant enough, you could feel pretty good about that outcome. And also, if you add your criteria as well, paying 10% above comps is such a minuscule thing at the end of the day, especially if you get the card you want that checks all the boxes, and you also have a great interaction at it as well. It's a win-win in my opinion. So I never look back, and I'm sure John might agree, but I never look back on those situations and think, oh man, I definitely could have got it for less. Because, again, visually speaking, the card fits what I want. Good centering, or whatever the criteria is, good centering, good registration, whatever. I think a lot of those outcomes always are favorable. So thank you, John. Detroit Collector, this is my buddy Eric. I have absolutely no problem paying over comps if the card is tough to find. In fact, a lot of the times I do pay over comps for scarce cards, and I don't lose any sleep about it. Comps are not the definitive answer of what a price should be for a card. It is just a starting point. If the card, on the other hand, is plentiful and you can find one anytime you search on eBay, I will review the card and what comps typically are. Most times I won't pay over comps because I know I will find one similar down the line. But again, comps should not determine the exact price. It should just be a tool. Great video, Sammy. So Eric he speaks on exactly what I was talking about, that the comps are really just a resource or a tool to kind of guide you to the ultimate price that you want to pay or you are hoping to pay. But he also touches on like scarce and rare cards. I mean, I've talked about this constantly. But Eric, when it comes to rare and scarce cards, if it's out in front of you at a show and you knew that you've had your eye on it for a while and you've done your research on it and it comes a little bit above what you're expecting to pay, I see no qualms about paying over comps or something like that, because if like the pop is only like 5 or 6 in the entire hobby, chances of seeing it again are going to be tough. So, I feel as though a lot of times collectors, when it comes to cards like that, if they don't jump on it, they end up regretting it down the line and thinking, oh man, I wish I did it. But a prime example is I bought my Pinkerton Mathewson, and I was on the verge of not buying it at the National, and I had Don showing me come over and just kind of give me a pep talk on it, and he kind of he made a lot of great points about how scarce that card is. I haven't seen one since at any shows. I've at a Philly show since the National. I didn't see it at Shriners. I didn't see it at the East Coast National. I haven't seen one at any of these big regional shows. Didn't, and who knows if we'll see one again. But I'm glad I made the purchase. Even if I did pay above comps, to me it's worth it. It's a card that I enjoy having. I love learning about it. But yeah, I definitely agree with Eric on this one, that rare cards, paying above comps, sometimes it has to happen. So thank you, Eric. And finally, the show and me, Don. I wore quote unquote paying over comp shirts for the 2023 National for a reason. You throw out comps on rare cards. I pay 20% over comps all the time. So yeah, man, this is Don. Don again. Don was with me when I bought the Mathewson, and Don is somebody who is well versed in the rare and scarce cards out there. He's has his finger on the pulse of like the vintage hobby, and so he's well aware that these sort of scenarios of finding rare and scarce cards is difficult, and that like what are the chances you're going to see that again? So I know I'm sounding like a broken record at this point, but you know, paying above comps for premium cards that you don't see too often. I know some might disagree, but I happen to be in that camp where it's like, okay, what do we need to do to get this deal done to where I can be happy and the dealer can be happy? So yeah, that's kind of ties into that discussion. But this kind of, I want to dive in a little bit further to kind of go back a little bit to what John was saying, JP Cards. He mentioned this will lead into our discussion for next week. But he talks about when you buy a card and if you have a good experience with the dealer and you, even if you pay a little bit above comps, again, if you find a card that fits that criteria, and you walk away feeling pleased with the outcome. You know we've all felt that before. You know that you're walking away like, man, I just got this awesome card, and I can't believe I have it. And it's like it's hard to explain, but I know I've had that feeling where I've both sides, or I've walked away from a show feeling like I shouldn't have bought that card. I think I paid probably too much. And there's also on the flip side, it's like, man, feel like I definitely paid, got a great card, and I paid, even though I paid a little bit more than what it was worth, the outcome was great and really pleased with it. So on both sides, I want to know from you guys, give me a scenario where you have gone to a show, bought a card or cards from a dealer or dealers, and felt really good about the purchase. And explain a little bit, what was that I guess discussion, or what was that scenario like for you? Kind of into detail on terms of how that deal went down for you guys, and what card is it, and we'll kind of go into it next week and pick a few comments out. For me personally, I actually had a really good I had a really good outcome on a card that I just picked up. Actually, I meant to show it, so I'll show it right now. This is one of the cards I picked up recently at the Hudson Valley Renegades card show. This Topps Venezuelan Willie Mays. There's a total of on SGC, just SGC by itself. I haven't looked at PSA, but there are 21 or 22 of these. I think 21 or 22 total. And the back is all torn, but the front looks great. And again, I went into it knowing that this card, I don't see it too often. Only a handful of Venezuelan dealers that I've seen, and Brian Fish is definitely one of them. And I always like buying from him and seeing what inventory he has. But when I remember walking out that show after talking with Mookie, because I was like, I was almost going to leave without buying this, but I talked to Mookie and he looked at it, and I felt really good about the purchase afterwards. I didn't spend through the nose for it, and perfectly happy with the outcome and the experience, and just interacting with Brian is always a pleasure. So a lot of those times, I remember those encounters of buying a card from a particular dealer and the impact that it has made for me, for my personal collection, but also encourages me to go back to Brian and be like, hey, I had a really great experience buying from you. I would love to see what else you have. So love to hear what you guys have to share from your experiences. Which dealers, if you have dealers in particular you want to mention, by all means. But nevertheless, let's continue this discussion into next week. I'll pick some comments and we'll go further. Have a great rest of your week, guys. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon and take care.